Hello and welcome to another episode of
Alright,
College Collective, brought to you by Jibber Jabber. My name is Ibrahim.
And my name is Hassan, and this is a show where we talk about university life, problems, and just give our general advice.
Today we have another special guest, my man Qasim. Thank you so much
thank
for
you
being
for
here.
having me.
For those of you who don't know, Qasim and I went to high school together back in Saudi Arabia, and after that, Qasim went to the United States to study at Virginia Tech, to study computer engineering, if I'm not wrong. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So
We only spit
we
facts in this call, only
I
facts.
wasn't sure if it was computer engineering, computer science. I know he gets mad at me when I mix them up. But yeah, computer
There's
engineering.
a significant distinction between the two.
Yeah, that's on me, my fault. But yeah, so today, yeah, we just wanted to talk a little bit about startups and
Students.
startups are pretty trendy uh, in a lot of places, and a lot of students look towards startups because a lot of students look towards getting experience, whether it's internships, working on campus, startups, all that stuff. So I just want to ask Hassan, what are your thoughts on the whole
Yeah,
thing?
I think before we start, I should give like the definition. So if you Google a startup, you get a startup is a young company founded by one or more entrepreneurs to develop a unique product or service to bring to the market. And I think that's a good definition. I mean, if you have a unique idea and you want to basically make a business out of it, it would be a startup because it's brand new and it's usually small. What about you, Qasim? Do you have a different, do you agree with the definition? What are your views on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of vague. Almost anything could be turned into a startup
Right.
or any. The idea is whatever thing that you can bring value towards in society or in any sort of aspect of life can be turned into a business and should be turned into a business because you're bringing value to people, and that's sort of the initial goals of most startups to begin with is how can you sort of bring value to a large group of people with the minimal resources early on, and the way you do that is by living in this sort of startup entrepreneurial mindset.
Damn, I mean, my man gave all the information that I didn't even need to Google it. I should have just asked you. What the hell?
You should have just asked him, bro.
I swear to God. So for
Slacking.
the people listening, listen, Ibrahim. Come on, man, chill. So for the people listening, let them know. Qasim does have a startup, and I'll let him mention about his startup. So go on, Qasim. Tell us about your amazing startup.
So the startup that we're currently working on, we haven't launched yet, but this is our second startup.
Right,
I'll start with the second one and then I'll talk about the first
Sure.
one.
go for it.
So the startup that the problem that we're trying to solve is one that is shared very strongly with students in high school, universities, especially in research areas. And the problem arises uh, from doing a lot of research in areas that take a lot of time. So let's say that you have an assignment where you want to find out, a certain, you want to find out what medicine is being controlled by a certain group of companies, and
Hmm.
you want to identify its side effects and all the benefits. And if it's like a report that you're running by for your employer or for a school project, you will most likely spend quite a bit of time and just doing manual research by going through a bunch of links on Google and running through a lot of reviews. And that whole process can take a lot of time. And
Right.
what we're trying to do is automate this entire process by sort of making it more efficient and sort of helping engineers and students and in their research process.
That's
Sounds.
good, yo.
Yeah.
Googling, me and Hassan have a lot of experience. We're doing our own research right now as well. Googling is so annoying. Like
Exactly.
just finding relevant articles and everything, it takes a long time. But I just want to ask, you mentioned this is your second startup,
Right.
and I know we're both third year students. So how early did you start this whole startup business? Like, what sparked you to make your first one,
Yeah.
and what was that like?
So So, I mean, it's sort of like the intention was never to build a startup. It was just to work on different projects, and that's kind of like, I guess the engineering mindset is just to build stuff that is cool and quirky, and sometimes it can go beyond just a project, but most of the time it's weird things that people do, and if you're lucky, it becomes into something bigger than just a side project.
Right.
And I was working on this idea freshman year, where I wanted to sort of find out how likely similar two people are uh, based on their personalities. And this whole idea arose from our sort of counselors and advisors in university asking us to sort of talk to everyone around us in our introductory classes. And it's like it was this way, a very naive approach to making new friends. And although since I'm in it's a pretty large university, and
Right.
trying to find out who the best person based on personality can be really hard to find. And so, just sort of engineering perspective, I thought it would be a pretty cool problem if we could sort of find like a computer program or just something that could sort of automate the search of manually going and talking to a lot of people. And if we could sort of find people instantly who are just like us or have very similar interests, maybe we could speed up the process of finding close friends and close connections. And like it sort of didn't work, although it seems interesting,
I
because
mean,
like
That's what we should highlight
there's
here.
so
Did it?
many
Why
like
didn't it work?
there's a lot of things to factor.
so
What
That's
went
why.
wrong there?
like the list is pretty large because there's so many problems with it. It was two things. The first, getting a lot of users, and the second thing was I had final exams, so I didn't have I didn't have the time to focus on it. And so after the exams, I kind of just got like
Yeah, you
I got
lost motivation
distracted with
for it.
another idea.
Yeah, you were like, alright, I'm
I'm
Yeah,
done
with
with
I
you.
this.
yeah
All of us can
yeah I
relate to
lost
this. Anyone watching can relate to
yeah
this. You lose motivation for
yeah.
anything. Exam week is crazy, to
It's yeah,
say the
it's
least.
crazy. Yeah. Yeah, and so like after that, I then pivoted to another idea with one of my friends,
hmm
and that became our first startup together.
That's cool.
Uh, so your first idea, the one you were telling us about, is the carpool one, basically for university students to help them out for covering long distances.
So it's basically like in three words or four words,
hmm
it's like Uber for long distances.
Right,
Let's say you want to go from point A to point B,
right,
Okay.
and it's like 200, 300 kilometers or miles, and instead of waiting for a bus, which comes at a very inconvenient time, uh, and instead of paying Uber or Lyft for an absurd amount of cash,
right,
you can sort of go onto this platform where you can book a ride within minutes with like $20 and sort of basically get an experience with a person who's also a college student. So it's this idea of selling this experience by democratizing or decentralizing to an extent uh, the the experience that you have when you're with other students on campus,
right.
and you're sort of putting them in like one tiny container on a journey 300 miles. So it's just
True.
something that's kind of something that we thought was a problem because we actually faced that problem because we couldn't find rides when we were going back home. So that's kind of like the big sort of aha moment for most startups
hmm
is you try to find problems within your own life when others people's problems, and you try to
Okay.
make sure and you're trying to find if
Solutions.
other people have that problem. Yeah. So
Right,
like if there's like a problem that you're facing right now, and you can find a small number of people, you can find a pretty fair amount of people who can relate to that problem, instantly, then you know that that problem exists, and it will definitely have more people throughout the world, and you can definitely create a solution around that problem, and you can basically start off as a
True.
startup or whatever. So it's basically, falling in love with the problem and not really the solution, because the solutions always change, but the problem usually remains fixated.
Right.
True.
We're saying something about how many miles. So this one startup did take off actually, and you were actually working, and there were people using the application, I guess, right?
Yeah,
And
so
you were
um,
telling something about the amount of kilometers covered, and I when I heard it, I just could think about how many people you helped. Could you like mention that again?
Yeah, so we had when we launched in like August of last year, within like around 4 weeks, we got over 16 to 20,000 miles, which I
Wow.
think is like 32,000 kilometers, and that was
Approximately.
from,
That's-
yeah,
How
approximately.
accurate is that?
Uh, I
No,
don't know. I don't.
continue.
I think it's right.
Continue.
20,000, right?
I'll take your word
32.
for it.
Yeah.
That's like spot on. He
It's
already
okay,
knows
don't worry.
exactly. Go on, go on, go.
Who's
I'm
gonna whip
sorry.
out the calculator?
You should never even try to doubt your math, but continue. For those of you who don't
And
know, Qasim is a next level math wizard.
the
Smartest integration person I've ever met, but that's just a side note.
and you're like
Continue.
the king of derivatives.
Okay, totally. But
I'm just good at using a calculator. I'm just good at using a
They
calculator.
ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
that's fair. But yeah,
Yeah.
continue, please.
Yeah, so yeah, just like within like a few weeks or at the end of our first semester, we had a pretty fair number of miles covered through our platform. We had around 400 daily active users just in our university. And so all of this was like it was just a free service, so we weren't making any money doing any of this. And the idea was to sort of keep this a free platform for at least a few more months, and just so that we could test everything out and make sure that it sort of gets perfected at our university before we expand to other colleges across the state.
That's fair.
And yeah, so like another thing that we did was we participated in a lot of competitions, entrepreneurship competitions, and while we were doing that, we were voted as like top 8 startups at from launch from our
Wow,
Mashallah, that's awesome.
yeah,
congrats.
yeah,
Congrats.
thanks. Yeah, it was, I mean, it was just like from the university, so top 8
That's
of
still an
that
achievement.
fiscal
Okay,
year.
just asking before you go on. You said your first one, your first ever startup failed. Not failed, but didn't really work too well because you got stuck with exams. Like, what was the difference in this one compared to your first one? Like, not
So
getting just generally, yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't really call that a startup because it's just a project. It's not really a
Fair.
startup, and that
Hmm.
sort of project pivoted to the first startup. It's I guess the key difference was the motivation in terms of the problem and how much that problem means to you. The first
True.
problem was a problem that a lot of people face, especially teenagers, but I didn't personally feel that problem as much as the second problem, which was regarding um, just finding rides. And this is because I couldn't get one of my I was supposed to catch a flight, and I couldn't get a flight because the bus was full, and so I had to sort of bootstrap my way trying to find a seat on the next day. And so that problem felt so real, and just this rush
That's
of,
true.
I guess, adrenaline or something just made me feel
Yeah,
like
I mean,
this is a
with
really
anything, I
exciting.
think it just if you're really interested and invested in something, you will definitely put in all the work. You will work the extra hours. You'll try your best to make that work out. So with I think with any
Yeah,
startup owner or anyone that makes a product or something, as long as you're passionate about it and as long as it's beneficial to society or just helpful to people around you, at least it's gonna help you go far with it.
Yeah,
yeah.
so
I mean,
I was gonna
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna ask, okay, but what about number? Did you need like investors, or has this all been like a solo thing till now, all of them? Or
So, our story is a little bit interesting because we did receive like some funding from like competitions, but we didn't really need a lot
uh,
of funding initially because it was all like internet based, and there's not like,
right,
if it's a, most tech companies don't need a lot of funding initially. It's only when you hire people and expand significantly that you start acquiring a lot of funding. But within the end of our first year, we received like an acquisition for our startup, and we went through, which is kind of weird because you sort of receive funding before acquisition offers, but
Hmm.
for us it was the
right.
other way around. So we received like a few acquisitions, and we went with one of them, and so that startup essentially in a way has been acquired, but we're still going through like the little bit last details. So it's kind of a weird story. It's not.
That's
It's
nice.
That's
like
true. I mean,
it's unusual
it's
because most
unconventional, kind of,
startups.
but
Yeah, it's
that's
yeah,
fair.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
Just wanna, 'cause since we're talking about startups and stuff, just wanna ask, it's like working at a startup is really different than working at, like an internship at a like a established company or something. Before, I just wanna ask Hassan first, and we can bounce to you, Qasim. What are, in your mind, some advantages and disadvantages of working or owning a startup? Or I mean,
I
for
mean,
in our case, it'd be
obviously,
working, not really owning. But what do you think, Hassan?
yeah. So me and Ibrahim work for a startup. For the people that don't know, I mean, that's why we shout out Jibber Jabber. But obviously, the advantages you could think of is, uh, as for the people working there, it's the CEO and the bosses, like everyone in the startup, so you're closely connected to everyone. And same thing goes for the person who owns the startup. They're closely connected to everyone, so it's more tight packed. It's the people. It feels better, right?
Yeah,
Uh, Compared to like a huge company. And for disadvantage, I mean, there's a little bit lack of specialization, I guess, because let's say you wanted in a startup, you don't have that many workers again. So that could be a problem too, where let's say you need more people that are good at coding, or you need someone else that's marketing and stuff. Usually it's one person doing a lot of different things. What do you think, Ibrahim?
yeah, I agree with that. Uh, I mean, with startups, it's not a lot of people. It's always like
Hmm.
a small select few that work on a startup. So again, it ends up being a few people do most of the work, whether it's marketing, whether it's the coding, whether it's like a lot. One person basically has a lot of jobs. But then again, if you're working at a
Right.
startup, it's more flexible with time. You basically,
Exactly.
whatever you give into it is what you get out of it, basically. So if you invest more time in it, you might
True.
end up getting more. But I think Qasim would be able to say more on this. What are you thinking?
Have you employed anyone before we start? Have you employed anyone, Qasim? No, right?
We had like a lot of
Oh, wait.
applicants, but we didn't employ because it was
Big
like
big money
a
moves.
whole.
I swear,
But
wild
okay.
applicant.
Yeah, but I mean, like the answer is like quite spot on. Like you're right. It's like it's different in terms of having less people or fewer people just results in doing more work and doing different work. And it's like like it's very true. Like working at a startup versus working at a larger company, it's also difference in specialization. And
True.
when you're working at a startup, especially very early on, the fact that you get to see all these different jobs or different positions
Roles, right?
gives you like a better exposure or a very different exposure, and
True.
sort of it kind of just gives you like a better sense of what you may want to do. But at the same time, it's also very vague when you're working at a startup what the actual positions and titles are, because titles don't really mean much at a startup,
True.
especially if
Right.
it's just very new and very young. Being the CEO of a startup doesn't really matter if it's not making any money or if there's nothing solid to it.
Hmm.
And so it's all about sort of focusing on the mission and the mission, like being infect just being infected with the goal of trying to do something worthwhile while
True.
you're at the mission, and sort of it's just the how much that mission means to you that really drives people.
So I was gonna ask, so you prefer a startup instead of, I don't know, like finding an internship or a small job at the library in the university or an internship around somewhere else. You prefer rather to start your own company. I think that's like the biggest difference. I want to get your mentality on that. Why not an internship? Why do you go like, no, you know what? I rather I understand you first go like, wait, let me find a problem. You find a problem and then you're like, let me fix it. And that's what you get fixated on. But have you ever thought of, okay, maybe someone else will fix this problem. I should focus on getting an internship for computer engineering, you know? Has that thought ever crossed your mind?
So I guess one thing I want to say is you shouldn't like the goal shouldn't be to create a startup. Um,
Right,
if like that's the it's like it's almost like because like startups are like they're very ugly in the sense that it is like it basically like takes everything away from you, and you sort of you basically become the parent of this thing that you created, and it's very
right,
time consuming, and if all you do is focus on your startup, other dimensions of your life get slowly taken away. And
Hmm.
especially if you're in
one.
college, I think if you have an idea, a problem, then you should work on it, but not, you know, commit to it in the sense someone who's like 25 can, because you don't have all the time and all the money
True.
that they do, because
Resources,
you're
Especially as a
right,
student,
because
you have
yeah
to spend so many hours just towards studying, and then if you're gonna
yeah
exactly,
also focus on a startup that you made, you're not gonna have any social life, and that's gonna
exactly,
yeah
kill your whole, I don't know, your whole vibe for the whole university. Like it's not a
for real,
smart way to go about it. But I think when it comes to working for a startup, especially you mentioned this as well about getting a lot of exposure. I
right,
think especially maybe not later on, but at least earlier on, maybe after your first, your second year, when you have those summers in between your semesters, especially then, for maybe like 2 3 months, you should try it. If you have a startup you can go to, it's really nice to work at a startup because then you get a lot of experience at like with different
exactly.
fields and different things, and then you can sort of specialize in later on. So I think it's always better to be a little more general and get more exposure in the beginning, and then later on like later on make
You
it more
can
specialized.
specialize.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like Ibrahim said, if I know a lot of universities make you have co-op or where you work related to
Yeah.
your degree, but if you have free summers and you actually want to improve and you want to like learn to become more professional, and you want to work and do something with your time, then startups are great because most of the time they will also hire too, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't. It's not even about the money. Sometimes you should do it. Like my man Qasim said, they'll be focused on fixing the problem, and you should too. You learn a lot when you're trying to help other people, and you learn about teamwork, and you learn about problem solving when you join a startup and you try to
True.
help along with them, and you learn a lot of things, and you'll be doing work for many different roles. So it's really good for university students to take part in
Yeah,
startups
it doesn't
and
even have
have
to
a
be,
job
even
there.
if you're working at a startup, it doesn't have to even be related to your major. Like that's a lot of people
Exactly.
try to stick to their major and like, okay, if I'm a mechanical engineer, I'm gonna work a mechanical job. Like, no, if you should, it's better if you can, especially if it's not a co-op requirement and you have a free summer, you should maybe go towards the business side, go towards a marketing side, and get that whole perspective because that's a really good blend that you can have. Because a lot of people do end up studying a master's in business after engineering,
Right.
and
Right.
that's really important to know that as well. I think being a jack of all
Exactly.
trades is important in just being successful in the work life. So getting
Exactly.
exposure early on, and then in your co-ops you can use that whole you because when you work at a startup
Experience.
early on, you get accustomed to the whole work life. You know, you're meeting your
Right.
boss, you're meeting your colleagues and stuff. It's a whole new environment. You have to be professional. You have
Exactly.
to have these certain qualities that you never had because
But
we were
it's not
students. We're
as
just chilling
but
as
it's not
students.
as heavy. Exactly. But
Yeah.
it's not as
So
heavy as when you're in like a huge corporate company, you know? It's like the right balance, I guess.
yeah, it's great.
So
yeah I guess
what do you think? Go for it,
like
Qasim.
I guess being like there needs to be like you said, like you need to have a balance between
Yeah,
generalization and
Right.
specialization.
Right.
But the idea is if you're good at something, whatever that is, and if you're the best in the world at it, there's very little like most jobs, if you think about it, is worth based on what society values,
true.
and a
Right.
person who's like a doctor is valued more than uh, who's someone who's a waiter or a waitress, just because it's much easier to replace them than a doctor, and because a
Right.
doctor is much harder to train than someone else. And so, if you're doing something that is sort of a function of the amount that you love that field, that position, that the knowledge, and also something that you can go deep in and sort of specialize to a degree that makes you like a world-class professional at it, then society will just value you more because you're much harder to
Right.
replace. And
Right.
sort of like
That's
Obviously,
the
that's
yes.
fair.
yeah, and sort of you want to make sure that, you're not just, I guess, sort of not like jack of all trades for
Of all the
everything. You want to make sure,
That's
yeah,
true.
you want to make sure that you're actually really good at
no,
very
I
few things.
I was just saying,
right,
like,
right.
And
just
I
I'm gonna
get, I
disagree a
get, I
little
get what
because
yeah,
Ibrahim was
I'm
saying.
gonna disagree
No,
because
wait,
I
wait.
think
Before
before you say anything,
before
I'm
we
just
go
yeah,
saying
ahead.
when I was just clarifying my point. I was just saying, okay, so when you start off in your first year, especially if you're a mechanical engineer, for example, because that's what I am. Mechanical engineering is a very broad thing. There's energy, there's automobiles, there's oil and gas. There's so many different things you
Right.
can go into. So
Right.
I think initially, it's good to get a grasp of everything, even if it's the
And
business side and other fields as well. Just get a grasp of what you vibe with, and then when you figure out what you want to do, then you it's really important to specialize. Get a
I think
master's,
Ibrahim
maybe
yeah,
was,
further
yeah,
your education. That's really important because if you don't specialize, then you're gonna be a lot easier to replace, like Austin said, and
exactly,
especially with
exactly.
our day and age. Like I think like a few generations back, it wasn't that important, but especially now, it's really important to get a master's degree, maybe even a PhD in what you really
Yeah.
want to specialize in, and
I
that's
think
also
when
more
Ibrahim
valuable. Yeah,
said
go on.
jack of all trade, he went like you should have a good idea of how overall business works. You should
Yeah,
obviously be specialized, but you shouldn't just be like, no, this is my only field. This is all I understand. Because that way, there's like you might not see the company about to fall from a different field or something else. Let's say you're engineer based and you only focus on making products. If you don't understand how economics work and how companies run and business management, you don't ever spend some time learning that, you won't see it coming when the company crashes, or you won't see the problems from far. You won't get a full picture. And I think that's what Ibrahim meant when he said jack of
yeah,
all trades. Like get a good understanding of everything, but then specialize in what you love or what you think you're good at. You agree, Qasim?
yeah, yeah. I just wanted to sort of clarify
yeah.
on
It's
Go
good.
for it.
It's good
this
that we
this
clarified that.
notion. But it's, I mean, it's still a very important tool to have the ability to shift from being focused on one specialized area to understand the trends or understand different areas and go into that. And the ability to think deeply in different domains is a very valuable asset, especially now because of all resources, I guess, of all skills, creativity is valued much higher than most other skills. Like it doesn't really matter how much knowledge you have because most information is available on the internet anyways. And
That's true.
Right,
what really matters is how you can think like from like first principles or from the fundamental levels. And as someone who can think and understand concepts, regardless of how much they know prior to it, are more valuable in terms of the amount that they can produce
True.
to the society, be it working at a startup, having their own startup, or working at a large company. It's all about just how much an individual could output at the end of the day. And
right,
That's
startups are
true.
a great way of doing that, but so are, large companies. It's just
true.
all about what, you're passionate about and what you, yeah.
That's fair.
So, is there any last piece of advice you want to give to college students about startups, or
Not just
maybe you
anything,
tell,
like studying,
yeah,
anything. Anything you
Uh,
have to say.
I don't,
Sorry for putting you on the spot, by the way. Just anything you
I
have
don't,
to
I don't,
say.
yeah. I don't think I'm an expert on like any of those, but I guess what I can suggest is like it's this idea. I think Jeff Bezos
Mm-hmm.
said this, and I think this is very clear or very valuable, and it's much harder to see it when you're young. And it's this idea of living life based on a regret minimalized perspective, which is
Right.
basically you want to sort of die with
Live
the
to the
least amount
fullest.
of yeah, live to your fullest while you
Exactly.
die with the least amount of regrets. And especially when you're young, you think that, you're gonna live forever and everything is just
True.
all rainbows and sunshine early on. But it's those early years where you have to sort of grind it out. And if you can sort of get a head start, especially when most people are just focused on the perks of a job or perks of being young, while you can sort
Right.
of work on something that sort of fulfills you, your dream or whatever it is, you sort of already have a head start
That's
with
true.
against everyone, and
Right.
you can outplay most people because now you're not working for a job but
Touche.
rather for something that you enjoy. Yeah, so it's just like it's very like it's not just like for students or for people in startups, but I guess it's very general, and I just find this very useful. And whatever decision I make or whatever I'm doing, I try to think,
Right.
would this be something that I regret 80 years from now if I live up to
It's
that
awesome.
point? It's just,
Can't
yeah.
can't wait for the person to listen to the part that said live to the fullest and say, okay, Qasim wants me to party all day. Yeah.
Nah.
So, I mean, if there's anything any of you want to add before
Nah,
I
I
wrap it up,
think
because I think
a lot of
think
good
we
insight, Qasim, on the whole
right,
startups and how that works. And especially we got
right,
it's really good that we got a lot of information on your whole experience with that. I think that's
right.
really beneficial to people. But
I
nothing
think
from my
what
side.
I mostly took away was the fact that don't be obsessed with having a, if you're going to have a startup, don't be obsessed with having a startup. Be actually trying to help the world, and it'll all fall into place from there, right, Qasim?
Yeah, yeah, that's fine.
That's
we
like a
just
that's a
we
simplified
just
version. You're
simplified
like,
everything you
I
said.
mean, kinda, maybe.
But
It
nah,
But yeah,
works.
that works. It fits.
I hope we gave a good view of if you wanted to work for a company or a startup, or if you were starting one, and would love to hear your opinions in the comments below. If this is one of the medium you guys listening to, if it has comments. If not, we upload on YouTube, Apple Spotify,
Apple, Spotify, that's a
cause
new one.
cause that's a thing. We upload to Apple Podcast and Spotify and on Anchor. But go to our YouTube if you want to drop comments,
Please go to our
or on
YouTube.
Instagram
Like,
or
subscribe,
Instagram,
comment, all the good stuff. Like we always
my
say.
JJ app. And yeah, I think that's everything. We got it all covered. Students and startups, guys. See you.